I was thinking. I have spoken previously about the problem of unreliable sources. I recently encountered a situation in which their unreliability proved useful in answering a question. A while ago, a commenter asked me an interesting question: did the Iroquois have women warriors? I hadn't heard anything like that, but given what I know of the gender norms of the time, it isn't outside the realm of possibility. Some women hunted. About a half a dozen were appointed chief at one point or another, so on the face of it, it's not such an unreasonable proposition. So I went and I did a fair bit of digging, and I was able to turn up absolutely nothing. I found no historical claims, I found no modern claims that link back to anything historical. But, as we all know, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So let's examine this in a little bit more detail. The way I see it, when speculating about something for which there is poor to no evidence, we need to ask ourselves 4 questions. 1. Does this thing have a reason to exist in the period, and do we have a reason to suspect it might have existed in the period? 2. Is it possible for this thing to have existed within the cultural, economic, technological framework of the day? 3. Is it viable for it to have existed in the aforementioned? And 4. Why is there little to no evidence of it? Let's apply this method to a different subject before returning. There is no concrete evidence for pre-Columbian mittens. To my knowledge, there are no surviving examples of mittens from the pre-Columbian period. There is also no mention of mittens among the very early literary sources. So let's bring up our logical tool and try it out. First, is there a reason for mittens to exist in the period? Is there a reason to suspect they might have existed in the period? Yes, there is. Canada gets cold. If you want to be outside for more than a few minutes in the middle of winter, you need mittens. Is it possible that someone might have come up with the design for mittens within the context of the period? Is their construction possible within the technology of the period? Mittens are not a complicated piece of technology. They're a fur bag that goes on your hands. Sewing is a similarly uncomplicated technology and one that we have literary and archaeological sources for. Would mittens do their job well enough to be worth the cost of entry? Well, we still use mittens today, and they don't take very long to construct. Is there a reason why we have no evidence of pre-Columbian mittens? Well, leather is susceptible to both wet and dry rot. It requires either periodic maintenance or else very specific environmental conditions in order to survive. Mittens are also a mundane enough subject that it's entirely believable that the literary sources might not have bothered with them just because they were too boring. Mittens pass our test on all 4 counts, thus I think it's pretty reasonable to say that people wore mittens even though we don't have any concrete evidence of this. So if we return to our Iroquoian Amazons, let's put them through the test. I think the 4th is the only interesting question, so I'm just going to blow through these. For the first, yes. For the second, yes with a caveat. For the third, maybe. So on the 4th, the archaeological side can be explained as, well, not a lot of stuff survives, but what about the literary side? I've spoken before about how sensationalist many of the early sources are. They exaggerate, lie, and misconstrue as often as not, which is why I find it extremely interesting that there is silence on this subject, particularly as claims of this kind already have a precedent with regards to the New World. Stories of women warriors is one of the reasons why that part of South America is known as the Amazon. So you got a bunch of people trying to sell sensationalist memoirs, you got a bunch of other people pushing propaganda for conversions and this, that, and the other, and yet they miss this opportunity. Why is this? It seems to me that this is a prime subject for exaggeration. To the European audience, the idea of the woman warrior would be foreign, exotic, titillating. That sort of thing tends to sell memoirs. On the propaganda side, it would fit in with their notions of barbarism and inferiority. Oh, those men over there, they're so weak, bunch of pansies, they have to get their women to fight for them. You already get this sort of thing as a response to Iroquoian feminism. I found people describing Iroquoian men as a bunch of mama's boys because they involve the women of the village in important decisions. So, is there a reason why there's no evidence? No, there's absolutely no reason. If anything, there ought to be a lot of false positive evidence. The sources talk about people who eat primarily babies and go stark naked in the snow. If there was anything to latch onto with regards to sensationalism, you would think they would have latched onto it. So, returning to the question of Iroquoian women warriors, it's pretty much a no. I'm not going to say it never happened, there were undoubtedly several, but if it did happen, it was infrequent enough that the European writers never noticed. Just a thought.